Oh, so good morning, everybody. Today is the 20th of Tammuz, which is the 30th of June, and it's 4th of July weekend. Very important holiday for us, America, but also interesting to note that amongst the Sephardic community in America, especially the Spanish and Portuguese communities, that the Independence Day was seen as a Jewish holiday of sorts, where there was a sort of Hallel that was recited, not a real Hallel, but like it was festive. They didn't say Tachanunim, they didn't say Tachanun or any penitential prayers. They treated it like a quasi minor holiday. Okay, but in any event, everyone should have a good weekend, a safe weekend, and try to stay cool because it's hot everywhere.
Yosef,
Now, yes.
Yosef, before we begin, is there any update on Miriam's situation?
No, not that I know of. She's
Okay.
Yeah, everything is still pretty much the same that as far as I know. But that's a good point. We should dedicate the shiur to the refuah shlema of Rabbanit Miriam Bloom, and that God should have mercy and heal her and give her comfort and strength.
Thank you.
Last time we were together, we were talking about the genealogies that we see in the book of Bereshit, and the two differing genealogies between the Bnei Cain and Bnei Shet, the descendants of Cain and the descendants of Seth. And we see a lot of overlap as far as names. We see two Hanochs, two Lemechs, but we see that they are different characters altogether. We even see similar themes, such as Yared, but in one case, Yared is I want to bring God down to the earth, and in the other case, Yared is the generation is going downhill. And that was the themes that the Bereshit is presenting to us. It's not just something you read like it's a newspaper or something. It's something that you have to unpack a little bit. So we left off with two people. With Noah, who was a descendant of Sheth, and his father was Lamech, a different Lamech than the Lamech of Cain. And Noah's wife was a woman who was named Naamah, who was a descendant of Cain, a cousin of Tubal Cain, who was the creator of instruments of war and things like that. But Naamah, the Midrash credits Naamah, who created the finer things in life, so to speak, the arts, music, things like that. And in fact, Naamah's name means pleasant. She was a pleasant person to be around. And Noah, his name is also related to pleasantry, but it's more of like when we say something is a reach nichoach, when we have incense burning, or there's a good smell, that's a reach nichoach, and it's related to the word Noah. But Noah is more of like comfort. And in fact, his father named him that because he believed that he would bring comfort to the generation. And interestingly enough, the rabbis say, how did he bring comfort to the generation? He invented the plow. And because he invented the plow, it allowed people to till the earth much more easily. That's a whole other midrash that deserves unpacking all into itself because it's not so simple. But we'll continue on from there. That Noah and Naamah, they get married. And they have three children, Shem, Ham, and Yafeth. The point here is that we see for the first time the children of Cain and the children of Shet marrying each other, coming together and creating a family. And this allows humanity to unite again in a certain regard. They're not separate from each other into different factions. They've come together and they create a sort of new spiritually elevated human being. And if you want to see this as through the lens of evolutionary theory, and triggers the extinction event, so to speak, of the previous humanity. The previous humanities, they disappear because this newer humanity has taken this place, and that's the family of Noah. And they create this spiritually enhanced people. And that's where we left off last week. Any comments, questions, concerns about that? Talk. So, 1 second. Just make sure I see everybody. Okay, and that means I think we're in chapter 95.
We're somewhere in the middle of 95.
Yeah, of paragraph 4, I believe, but we'll look at it again here. But let me just make sure it's up. And yes, okay.
Mine isn't broken out in paragraphs.
Preview. Yes, Kuzari. I'm coming to the end of the PDF here, so I'm gonna have to make some new scans eventually, but we should be fine for today. Or definitely be fine for today. Okay. Yes. I'll just read this last paragraph again, or this last sentence here again. It says, and so it went until Noah. Each generation they were elite individuals who resembled Adam. Remember, this resemblance is not physical. And that's why I have a problem with the word elite, because it sort of it's not exactly, doesn't capture what the Haber is trying to say, but they resemble Adam in the sense of his intellectual, spiritual predilections, and thus they were also known as Bnei Elohim, the sons of God. Each was superlative in his physical makeup, stature, longevity, wisdom. I think I mentioned last week also that according to Harambam and to the other Hachamei Andalus, not everybody lived to be 960 years old in the days of the Bereshith. It was only these prophets who had perfected themselves. Lehavdil, Elif Havdalot, Inkets, sort of like in Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, you have that knight who was able to live all that time from the times of the crusade. Super Havdalah, Lehavdil. I'm not comparing the two. I'm just giving an example of what they have in mind. Okay. Longevity, wisdom, and ability. The Torah uses their lifespans to measure years from Adam to Noah, from Noah to Abraham. In fact, Pirkei Avot tells us there were 10 generations from Adam and to Noah. It breaks down what those 10 generations are. And then there were 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. Okay. Now let's continue here this week. Let's actually read some of these parts in Hebrew here, because it's important to, this part is going to become very nuanced. It's going to be important to try to understand. And granted, it's not originally Hebrew. The Hebrew itself is a translation of the original Judeo-Arabic, but I think it captures a little bit better than the English does. So we'll try our best to keep both of these in line. ואפשר שהיה מהם שלא דבק מעניין אלוהים, כתרח, אבל אברהם בנו היה תלמיד אביו ובו עבר, ועוד שהגיע נוח עצמו, והייתה בעניין אלוהי דבק בהם מאבות ואבותם אל בני בנים. So, now that we're coming to Abraham, we're going to explain how does this work with Abraham, because up until this point, we have seen an unbroken chain, if you will, from Adam to Shed, from Shed to so, and so on and so forth until Noah, that each person has a father who transfers this to him. Not so with Abraham. It was possible for divinity to skip a generation in this link of elite descendants, such as was the case with Terach. I think the answer is given away here, but who was Terach?
Abraham's father.
Abraham's father, Terach. It says that he dies in Haran. When they move from Ur Kasdim, Terach comes with Abraham and he dies in Haran. Now, the Midrash says that he doesn't physically die. What happens to Terach in Haran is that he becomes an idol maker. An idol maker, is that what you call it? Yeah, he becomes somebody who fashions idols. And for that reason, the Torah says that he died in Haran. There's a famous midrash, and many people are surprised that it's actually not in the Torah, because it's quoted like it is from the Torah, but it's not. It's a midrash, so it's homiletical. It's not a factual story, but it's a true story, if you will, where Abraham breaks all the idols in Terach's shop. Terach goes away one day, and Abraham smashes all the idols, save for one. And he puts the hammer in the biggest idol's hand, and Terach comes home and says, "What happened here? What have you done?" And Abraham says, "Look, I didn't do anything. I was watching the shop." And then these gods started to get into a fight, and they started smashing each other. And the biggest one won. He goes, "That's insane. These are idols. I made them." And then Abraham does his best Eddie Murphy impression and goes, "Aha, aha." Meaning, of course, these are things that you can't worship these things. These are things that you've made. The whole point of the Midrash is to show that from an early age, Abraham was already rethinking the culture that he was set in. And this is what the Haber is saying right now, that Terach's father did not inculcate Abraham with any of the values of his forefathers. It was totally lost to him. So how did Abraham grow? How did he get this transmission, that, if you will, from Adam. He says here that, but it resumed again with Abraham, who was the disciple of his grandfather Ever, and who even knew Noah. Who knew Noah here? Was it Ever? Of course, Ever knew Noah. But here, what the text is trying to say is that Abraham himself knew Noah as well. And footnote 111, it's very short. It's just basically saying that Abraham was 58 years old when Noah died, which is also equivalent to the gematria Noah 5:8. Yes, yes. Someone have a question? No, okay, never mind. Yeah, 58. It's the gematria of Noah's name. It's a good way to remember that Abraham was 58 years old when Noah died. Rabbi Mark Angel, I think he wrote an article on this once, where he speculates that maybe, perhaps, you could write a midrash that Noah and Abraham met each other. One second. Sorry about that. That Noah and Abraham met each other, and that he somehow took information from him and asked him questions. But really, the reason that Abraham has some sort of connection to this heritage, if you will, is from Ever. And it's for this reason, does he say here? Yes, instead of just jumping the gun like you usually do, why don't we read the next paragraph? Abraham hayas segulat Ever. Abraham was the segula of Ever. He was the treasured, chosen. This is the elite word, and that he was the elite descendant and disciple. Not only was he descended from him, he was his talmido. He was his student, his chief student. Remember, we have a midrash that says that there was a yeshiva, Shem ve'Ever. There was a yeshiva that was established by Noah's son and his grandson, great-grandson. And they had this yeshiva. And here, because they had this yeshiva, Abraham would attend it. Of course, we're understanding this midrashically. We don't see any of this in the text of the Torah. We understand this midrashically. And that's for that reason he was called Abraham Ha'ivri, from Ever. Normally we hear, and I think we discussed this maybe a few months ago, we normally understand Abraham Ha'ivri being the Hebrew, Abraham the Hebrew, as being because he was against the tide, or he was an iconoclast. He was from across the river, Ever HaYarden, or Ever HaNahar, I should say. He was from Ever HaNahar, he was from over the river, and that's why they called him Ha'ivri. The Kuzari here is saying, or the Haber is saying in the Kuzari, that he was called Abraham Ha'ivri because he was the disciple of his grandfather Ever. Just like as you would call someone today a Maimonidean, or something to that effect, Abraham was an Ivri, and that he absorbed and understood the teachings of his grandfather Ever on a internal, intimate level. And that's why he's called that. And that's why we are called that as well, because we descend from this line here, the Hebrews, that is. Noah, he was also no, I skipped the paragraph. Sorry. No, I didn't. I was right. Ever in turn, let me just read that again. Was the elite descendant of Shem. Ever was Shem's chosen disciple. And remember, Shem is the son of Noah. Ever was his great grandson, and Ever was the chosen. In today's parlance, I think the more appropriate thing to call would be the Talmid Muvhak. He was the chain he was the next link in the chain, so to speak, for Shem, his grandfather. Shem, and this is going to be a little interesting. And there's someone informed me that there is a ma'amar from not the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, but the Friedecker Rebbe, who wrote about this section of the Kuzari specifically, and I'll check it out, see what he has to say. But Shem had inherited the temperate climates of the earth, of which the choicest and most temperate was the land of Canaan. Known, and this is very interesting, it says here in the Hebrew, Adamat HaNevuah. It was known as the soil of prophecy. وَيَنْصَى يَفَتْ عَلَى صَفَوْنَ بَحَمَ هَدْرَوْنَ. And Yafet, he went to the north, and Ham, he went to the south. This could be just talking, I think the most likely is just talking about the Middle East, but of course the descendants were everywhere. But in the Kuzaris, understanding, many of the Europeans descend from Yafet, and I think Asians also, it's hard to say, and that Dirom being Africa and Arabia, or not Arabia, but Africa is the descendants of Ham. And that's why you see why many of the countries in Africa are named, in Hebrew anyways, are named after the descendants of Ham. Mitzrayim, Put, Kush, places like that, those are descendants of Ham. It's just it's an interesting to point out, there is a physical aspect to a spirituality. Spirituality without any physicality to ground it is it's ethereal, it's pie in the sky, there's nothing you can do with it. So here he's saying that because Shem inherited this temperate climate, it wasn't too hot, it wasn't too cold, the rain was good, and this and that, he was able to not work as hard physically, and this is my pirush on it, and was able to dedicate time to the study of Elohut, of godliness of God, and passing it on. This is why he had a yeshiva, and etc., etc. Okay, any comments, questions, concerns? Top. Remember, don't feel shy. You can always jump in and complain. Usugulat Avrahami Banav. Let me just pull this up again so I don't have to move it so much. Let me just, yes, right here in the Hebrew, right here in the English. Usugulat Avrahami Banav Yitzhak. Perhikik Akal Banav Haaretz Hazov Misugalet. Kedeshiti He Moyachel Yitzhak. Usugulat Yitzhak Yaakov. Okay, so Abraham's elite descendant was Yitzhak. Abraham had many children. Not only Ishmael, he also had other children with Keturah, who was his concubine after the passing of his wife Sarah. He had children with Hagar. I think aside Ishmael, maybe not. But Abraham ends up sending his children away. He sends Ishmael away. He sends his other children, Keturah, away to the east. If you look in Bereshit, you'll see that he sends his children to the east. Some speculate that the children he sent to the east are the patriarchs of Hinduism. And this is why in Hinduism, the highest class is Brahman, coming from Abraham. And he had children named, what do you call it? What do you call a Hindu yeshiva? It's called ashram. Yeah, an ashram. It was named after one of his children, was named Ashram. And so on and so forth. I don't know how strong of a theory that is. It's a nice little connection, but yes, Mark.
The book I have, it translates elite descendant to essence.
You said essence?
Yeah, it uses the word essence instead of elite descendant.
Can you give me an example of the sentence?
The essence of Abraham passed over to Isaac.
Yes, I like that. I think that translates the concept a lot better, because the student is merely the vessel, and the teacher is pouring, giving, teaching, and the student has to accept it. The student can reject it, as we can see with Ever and Terach. Terach did not accept; he rejected, and it's not. It has nothing to do with their innate qualities, but everything with their choices and decisions. So I like that a little bit better. I like that better. Maybe I'll translate it that way from now on. Good. So after Yitzhak, Yitzhak inherits solely his father's legacy, and this is actually a practice that was done in the ancient Near East. It's a formal practice of inheritance. It's not that Ishmael is sent away and the other children are sent away because Abraham did not love them or didn't have any connection with them. It's a formal practice of inheritance, and he wanted Yitzhak to inherit only, for whatever the reasons may be. And then we can discuss that when we go over Sefer Bereshit next year, or again next year. And then from Yitzhak, his essence passed over to Yaakov. And of course, we know that Yaakov also had a brother. His brother was Esau. And Esau gets a bad rap. Esau or Esau, depending on how the pronunciation, how you pronounce the vav. Esau gets a bad rap in our midrashic literature. But if you read the text of the Miqra, you read the text of the Chumash, you don't see anything necessarily wrong, bad, or evil about Esau. Don't get me wrong. The teachings of the Hachamim are not to be taken lightly, and there's a reason that they single out Esau as being this Rasha Gamur, this completely wicked person. But also a lot of it has to do with the persecution of Western nations, of Rome specifically. And Esau was identified with Rome because he's called Edom. Edom is a ruddy, it's red, like in that. And Rome's color was, they loved red. You see any of these Roman centurions are always, in movies, they're always wearing the red cape and the red, mohawk on their helmet. I don't know what that's called, but they have that going on. And all their banners were red, and the Romulus and Remus, there's a lot of red themes, so they associated it with red, and with Rome, I mean. And also, they really couldn't speak out against Rome in clear language. This is why also the hazir, the pig, gets a worse rap in kashrut than literally any other non-kosher animal, because Rome's animal, its avatar, was the not the warhog. What do you call it? Warthog or boar. That's the word. That it was a boar, and Rome was associated with this animal, the boar. And that's why in rabbinic literature, you see things talking about the filthiness of the pig, and this is why the pig is so bad. What about octopuses? What about octopi, I should say? What about octopi? What about cuttlefish? What about donkeys? They're also not kosher. Why? But we, have positive relationships with them. Why is the hazir singled out amongst all the non-kosher animals? It's because it's a code word for Rome in the Gemara, which is why there's a Gemara that talks about, the pig is bad because it puts out its feet, its cloven feet, and says, "Look at me, I'm kasher," but it doesn't chew the cud. It was the Hachamim criticizing Rome for saying, "We're friendly, we like you, we'll be helpful to you," but then meanwhile oppressing and murdering Jews every day. The word decimate comes from the Roman practice of killing 1/10 of the population, and that's what they would do. They would go through Judea and they would nail people to their homes, 1 out of every 10, and they would decimate the population to keep them in line. So this is why the Hachamim had a huge problem with the pig. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking about Esau and the bad rap that you said he got.
Mhm.
On the other hand, when he meets Jacob later on, he falls on him and hugs him. So he is not such a mean person.
Right.
He really loved his brother.
Absolutely. You see that the entire time Esau wants to make peace with Yaakov. But like in this section, when Esau hugs Jacob, the Midrash has a very interesting take on that as well. It says that he was a vampire, and that he wanted to bite into Jacob's neck and drain him of his blood. But at that moment, Jacob's neck turned into solid marble, and he broke his teeth. And because he broke his teeth, he started to cry. And that's why they're demonstrating the relationship of Rome with Judea rather than the relationship of the actual brothers. They're understanding it through that lens. And this is why there's also a midrash. It says that in the days of the Mashiach, the pig will become kasher. It doesn't mean the actual pig that you eat, that the Torah is eternal. You can't just change Torah. But the Rome itself will do teshuvah and become a nation become an upright nation and become better for the people and spread godliness and peace rather than war and bloodshed. I mean, at least that's my interpretation of the Midrash. I know other people have different interpretations of it, but that's my interpretation. But Esau isn't not inherently wicked. There's nothing evil inside of him. He just makes different choices than Yaakov. In fact, you could argue that Yaakov makes bad choices as well here. But what ends up happening is Yaakov grows and he becomes more in line with the teachings of his father Yitzhak, and that's why the essence of Yitzhak passes over to Yaakov. That was a huge sidebar. Sorry for that. But then he continues here. The Yitzhak, his elite descendant was Jacob, Yaakov. أخي بن شيخه يعقوب على and that Yaakov's brother Esav failed to gain a foothold on the land, for Yaakov had exclusive rights to it. This goes back to the blessing that Isaac gives to Yaakov. In fact, he takes the blessing, the birthright, and buys it. But then he also takes the other blessing of Esau, that he was going to give him the land. But he also has, in that story, it's, look at it again. It seems that it's very enigmatic. It's very hard to understand for me, because a blessing there seems to be some sort of legal formality to the blessing as well. That it's more than just a "I wish you well" blessing. It's a "I'm gonna give this to you" blessing. And by Yaakov tricking Yitzhak and doing it that way, he actually made a legal, what do you call it? Kinyan in English. A legal acquisition, if you will, of the land that was going to go to Esav. Important to note also that Esav does get his own land. He gets Mount Seir, which is in the land of Edom, and he has his own ancestral homeland as well, but it's outside of Eretz Israel. Yes, Carol.
I wanted to ask a question. It may be idiotic, but the midrash, at what time period are you explaining all this? Was this from? I mean, it's like we don't understand the thinking of the different times, is how I feel.
Absolutely. The Midrash has a wide date period, epic. I don't know, era is what I want to say. There's a wide era for the Midrash. There are several different Midrashim. There's the Midrash Tanhuma, there's the Midrash Rabbah, there's the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, and I'm not an expert on which Midrash comes from which era. I do know the certain Midrashim that I do know. I don't know all Midrash very well, because it's a vast corpus of work. But I do try to dig in and see when was this written. So the ones about in the Gemara, that was written during the times of the Amoraim and the Tanaim, depending on where in the Gemara you're seeing it. And that's the Roman period. That's in the period of Rome. So if you're seeing a Midrash in the Gemara, and Angarata, I should say, in the Gemara, that's coming from that period.
Okay.
Other works, I think Midrash Tanhuma, for example, comes from the 11th century, from France in the 11th century, from the days of Rashi. So it's a much later period than it's thousands of years. It's 1,000 years after that. I'm not sure when people stopped writing official Midrashim, but people still write Midrashim. It's when I give a Devar Torah or Drasha, that is a form of a Midrash. It's not like the official Midrash, like the Chachamim have, but like it is a Midrash, and everyone does the same today too.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Go ahead, Ann.
I was thinking, and this kind of applies to Carol's question also. Just as we study Torah over and over again, every year, and we find meaning for it in our current days. What you were saying about Rome and the fact that apparently Rome will change and will be good towards the Jews, it's actually happening. Because if you think of the current popes, or the current pope right now, the one from Argentina, I can't think of his first name.
Francis.
Pope Francis, thank you. He is turning in goodness towards the Jewish people and towards Israel. And maybe this is a trend, because also Pope John Paul the second, I forgot, he also changed the whole awful
attitude.
things about the Jew, the attitude towards the Jews, and that they did not kill Christ and that type of thing. So I think maybe we are seeing this midrash even today coming to fruition slightly, little by little.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I'll take this side about it, because there's something to point out about context, history, in the world that we're living in. Because this is going to be a point that the Haber is going to bring up, that the Haber is going to highlight, and want to make sure that we understand appropriately. The Catholic Church in the past was the major source for Jew hatred in Europe, in the Middle East. There was a point where Christians and there's a lot to say about it. There's a fantastic book called In the Shadow of History, and it's about the dawn of modernity, Jews and conversos in Spain suffering from the Inquisition, and how really the Catholic Church's plan to make the whole world Christian really backfired and has really led to the creation of secularism, of skepticism, of the modern world rejecting the Christian model of religion, and creating the world's first secular people. And the book argues that the world's first secular man was Baruch Spinoza, and that he was the byproduct of the Inquisition. And today, at least since the times of, what was his name? I forget the Pope's name, who did, maybe it was John the 23rd.
Yes.
John the 23rd, who initiated Vatican II.
John
And
23rd.
when he came to the Jews of Rome, to the time, he went to the Senate, met him, he said his name was Joseph, before it became John. They choose a different name when they become the Pope, and his name was Joseph. And he said to them in Latin, "I am your brother Joseph." Like from the book of Shemot, when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers and says, "I am your brother Joseph, is my father still alive?" He quoted that to them in order to make an understanding between the community of Rome, which had been traditionally oppressed, a heavy oppression. In fact, the term and ghettos come from Rome, of segregating us away from the Christian community, and to make these changes. And I am hopeful for the future, and to see that there can be a real convivencia, real coexistence between these peoples, and hopefully that it's not a prophecy. The midrash is not prophecy, of course. It's like a hope, and then hopefully that in the days of the Mashiach, that these sorts of coexistences will become commonplace. The Mashiach isn't going to come and change the nature of the world, but hopefully the Mashiach comes in the nature of people learn to live along together a little bit better. All right, so let's continue here. Yaakov's brother was Esau. He failed, so he gets his own land. Yaakov gets exclusive rights to it. Yes, all of Yaakov's children were his elite descendants, or all of Yaakov's children had the essence of the teachings of Abraham, Yitzhak, and himself. They were all being worthy of divinity. What do we say here in the actual language? Kulam ru'in le'inyan ha'elohi. All of them were fitting for this concept of ha'elohi, of understanding God, or understanding the concept of God, of what this is, what this relationship entails. And they inherited the land reserved for Elohi, for divinity, and that is the land of Canaan here. We're going to dissect a little bit later, why does this need a physical center? Why can't we just be all over the place? But we'll get to that. Any comments, questions on that before we continue to the next paragraph? Okay, so וזה היה תהילת חול העניין האלוהי על קהל, אחרי אשר לא היה נמצא כי אם ויחידים. Thus began a new era, when divinity rested on the community, where it previously had only rested on individuals. This is a new step forward. Adam's descendants did not all inherit this divine connection. Individual people did. Yaakov Avinu, when we have Bnei Israel, this is the first time you have a community of people engaged in this together as one unit, where it is an equal distribution of this access, connection, understanding, what have you. and not just individuals scattered around the planet. This is going to connect to our idea of Torah mitzvot. Is it better for one individual in the entire world to be observing the entire Torah perfectly and all its details, while the rest of the world doesn't? Or is it better that that more people in the world observe parts of the Torah to the best of their ability, even though it's not perfect and they mess up? And I think it's the latter. And it challenges the idea of in Orthodox today that like one person learning Torah sustains the whole world. That's not entirely true. There are statements that the Chachamim make like this, but they have to be understood in the sense of that. And this is a little early for a Hanukkah metaphor, but I'll use the Hanukkah metaphor. The reason we light candles, and this is the halakha, and I know people practice differently today. I'm not telling you to practice differently. I'm telling you how the Chachamim envisioned it. You're supposed to light on the petah, on the doorpost, on the door, in the doorway of your home, outside, parallel to the mezuzah. You have the mezuzah on this side and the menorah, the Hanukkah on this side. And you're all supposed to light before sunset, not at nightfall, but before sunset while there's still light out, but right before it goes down, so that the lights could be visible. But you can see that they're being lit for a reason that has nothing to do with creating visible light to help you see. And they're supposed to be outside of the doorway so that the land and the neighborhoods will be peppered with these little lights throughout the neighborhood. And that is what we call Pesurei Nisa, to publicize the miracle. All of these little lights are peppering the neighborhoods, peppering the country, peppering the world. And that kind of demonstrates that everywhere throughout the land, even though it's not the entire people or the entire country, but all throughout you have these lights signifying God's presence or God's miracles in the world. The same thing is now happening here with Yaakov Avinu. Before you had this one light here, one light there, one light here. Nothing was really connected, nothing was unified. Here for Yaakov's children, with Bnei Israel, we're having a unified presence of this godliness. And this is going to be, this is a sort of a precursor to what it means to be Am Segula, or the chosen nation, and having our experience at Har Sinai. Yes. God would watch, God preserved them and caused them to multiply and raise them in Egypt. We were raised up to our prominence in Mitzrayim itself. Just as one would cultivate a tree which has exceptional roots, waiting for it to produce fruit, a whole fruit. Similar to the quality of the fruit of the original tree from which it developed. So he's saying here that the children of Israel, this is a fantastic metaphor. The children of Israel have this divinity resting on them. But they themselves are very flawed, are very weak, they're very scattered and disunified as brothers. They even sell Yosef into slavery. And then Yehuda, we see what's going on with Yehuda and his approach to his family. We see that Reuven sleeps with Yaakov's concubine, and there's a whole bunch of discord in the family. Shimon and Levi, they go to Shechem and they murder the entire town. And these examples highlight that their roots are strong. It's a tree with strong roots. They have Yaakov, they have Yitzhak, they have Abraham, Ever, Noach, they have all these strong roots, but the branches themselves, they're not ready to produce strong fruit. If fruit comes off of them, the branches will snap off, so to speak. So Hashem puts the branch, the tree, puts it in Mitzrayim, puts it in Egypt, to cultivate, to strengthen the branches themselves, to understand that other people, the suffering of other people. And this is one of the reasons why when we see, you will not oppress foreigners, you will not oppress strangers, you will not oppress Egyptians. And why? because you yourself were foreigners, you were strangers, you were this, you were that in the land of Egypt. So you should know what it's like to understand other people. And the branches, they themselves, they become strong. Roselomar, that is to say, Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Yosef, Echav, Hayamin, Haperim, Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, Kemo, Besalel, V'Ahoyav. The fruit of the original tree was Avraham. It was Yitzhak, it was Yaakov, and Yosef and his brothers. The new fruit now includes Moshe and Aaron and Miriam, and also included the likes of Besalel and Aholiab and the Rosheh. וכמו ראשי המטות ו70 הזקנים אשר היו ראויים לנבואה מתמדת, and it included the tribal heads of and the 70 elders who are worthy of unending prophecy. And it included Yushua ben Nun and Caleb and Yefuneh and Miriam's son Hur. Does anybody know who Hur is? And it's not Ben Hur from the movie. Hur is Miriam's son. This probably might be the first time you hear of him, but there is an episode in the Torah where Moshe has to keep both of his hands up, and as long as his hands are up, the Israelites are winning the war, and when his hands come down, they start losing the war.
Hur held them up.
Yeah, so one who held them up was Rishwa, the other one who held up was Hur. Another place we see Hur is in the incident of the golden calf, which is really what the original question is, what we're talking about here. The original question that the Kuzari asks the Haber is, if you guys are so holy, what happened with the golden calf here? And then if you remember, like 3 years ago, it feels like now, the Haber says to the Kuzari, bear with me as we go over this. And we're still bearing with him. We're waiting for him to get to his point. But Hur is the children of Israel, not really the children, the minority of people, the Erev Rav, as the Midrash understands it, approaches Hur and Aharon. And Hur is the senior person in charge at this point. And they say, we want this golden calf, do it. And according to the Midrash, Hur refuses. So the Erev Rav kills Hur in front of Aaron, and Aaron sees this. And so because in the first part of the story in the Torah, it says they came to Hur and Aaron. And then the second part says they came to Aaron. So the Midrash says, what happened to Hur? That's the answer. That's the answer that they give. And this is why it also explains why Aaron was so acquiescent to the Erev Rav. He did not want that to happen to him as well. So he just did what they asked him to do. But you see here that the Haber is highlighting that Hur was one of these fruits that were coming off of this tree now. And there are many, many more. You can think of many characters that we are named. I think any character you see named in the Miqra here, in the Chumash, in the book of Shemot and Bamidbar, but you don't know who they are. I think it's one of these fruits, like Serach. Serach was a woman, Serach ben Asher is named, and there's a midrash about her and why she was so worthy of being named. Is because she was one of these fruits. And you have Nachshon ben Aminadav, who jumps into the ocean and splits the sea for us because of his emunah, so to speak. These people were worthy of being illuminated by the divine light and they're receiving God's individual providence. That's a huge deal in rabbinic mysticism. And it's somebody pointed out to me that there is also a doctrine in Islam, similar, I think it's Islam, maybe it's Sufism, it could be Sufism, called illuminationism or illuminism. I have to look into, I didn't look into it yet. But it relates to this idea of the Or Hanivra, this light that exists. And this could be where people get the idea of halos from. And we see this concept with Moshe for sure, that Moshe's face illuminated or was radiating light. But there's this idea that these individuals had some sort of glow to them, some sort of illumination, and had to be with their perfection. I don't like that word, but their completeness, their wholeness as people in both physical and spiritual realms. And that they were worthy of what's called here it is. they have this special hashgacha. That is, according to Rambam, the what you call divine providence or hashgacha pratis, and that is something that is unique. It's not everything, but it's unique in that there's a special interest vested in these that God is protecting and watching over in a very close way. Whatever that means, I'm not even sure what that really means, because it's hashgacha. It's a watching over. It's not involvement, but it's a watching over. There's more to say on that, but it's outside of the scope of today. So we'll continue, unless there are any questions, comments, concerns on this section. Tov, let us move forward then. V'im hayu b'neihem mamrim, hayu nig'aleim. If there were sinners among them, it's translated, they were rejected, they were pushed away. Mamrim is there's a concept in halakha called a zaken mamre. A zaken mamre is a member of the Sanhedrin who is rebellious against the Sanhedrin. They are there to disrupt the procedures of the Sanhedrin, and they openly speak out against the legal decisions of the Sanhedrin and teach the opposite, or teach and not in line with them. The law is that they're supposed to be put to death. This is the same word here. It's that it's not exactly sinners, because that's a very broad. It really means people who were against the mission of the Jewish people of the Israelites in the desert. It doesn't mean like, they made a het, or everyone makes hatim, everyone makes avonot, excuse me. But here it means specifically that they were against the mission. They were against the ideas put forth by our people. That's what it means, but they were nig'alim, that they were rejected by God, not because they made a little mistake, but because of that attitude.
You want to scroll?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
As evidenced by but even they were elite. Even they had the essence of Judaism in them. They, without any doubt, they were part of this. Right here, if they were sinners, subparagraph 8.
yeah.
They were still part of the nation. They're still part of the because this is part of their ancestry. It's a part of their, it says innate qualities. I do not like it. It's more like their inherited nature, epigenetics, things like that. My grandfather passed away when I was very, very young. I did meet him, but I was very, very young. But people in my family will point out to the many qualities that I share with my grandfather that aren't really necessarily things that I picked up from being around him. It's just that we just happen to share these little, not picadillos, but little tastes and things, the things that we like, things that we dislike. This is some sort of, this happens and it's unsure why. But here, for example, Harambam will say something like, Am Yisrael Rahmanim Ham, that they have the quality of mercy. And that he says something very interesting, that if a Jew is lacking, if someone is claiming to be Jewish, but they're lacking in being merciful towards people and being understanding and compassionate towards people who are suffering, you need to check their background, because they might not be really Jewish. They might be pretending. And same thing here, that these people, even though they are rejecting the mission of God, so to speak, they still have these sort of epigenetic or ancestral or cultural qualities just by dint of being around these people inside of them. This is why a wicked person will sometimes be spared, so that the essence that he possesses will be distilled and will manifest itself in his children or grandchildren. There is a footnote here, Zohar Toledos. Oh, Toldos, like Toldos, like I thought it was meaning like Toledo, like the city. No, it means Toledo, Toldos, like the parasha. The quote is like this: the Almighty is forbearing with the wicked for the sake of the godly seed which may spring from them for the benefit of the world, as they're issued from Terach, that goodly scion, Abraham, who is a blessing for the world. I want to point out, it's not just Am Yisrael, it's not just the Jewish people who have this quality or have this ability where God is merciful to the wicked. It's also you can also see it in Am Yisrael's greatest enemies. For example, Amalek and Sanherib and Haman. All of these people, these three people, are, for example, with Amalek, we're not allowed to let them live. How we understand that, it's not genocide, but that's for a whole other time. That requires unpacking, and it's complicated. But they are rejected by God, hated by God, so to speak. However, we know for a fact that Haman and Amalek and Sanherib have descendants who taught Torah to the Jewish people. Some of our biggest rabbis, in fact, come from Sanherib, who was the emperor who came from Assyria and mixed up the northern kingdoms. So on the one hand, we're seeing that there's this, in quote unquote, some sort of seemingly genetic quality here, but it's more than that. It's that people, one generation may be written off for being wicked and being wrong, but later might do teshuvah and like understand their path differently. You have people whose grandparents were in the SS, but who today are, some aren't even Jewish today. You have people who grew up engulfed in the KKK, but now today are fighting for civil rights and voting rights in the South right now, and who are looking at looking at any sort of injustice and trying to undo the sins of their fathers or mothers. And you see that it's not about this person comes from this place, they are wicked, we write them off entirely. That there is things that you're going to get the attitudes of your culture ingrained in you a little bit. No one's going to be totally free from that, but they will have the opportunity to reject the things that they should reject and uphold and accept the things that they will accept. And I saw that you had your hand up. I didn't mean to.
I was going to add about the children of Nazis who were so horrified by what their parents did that they many of them immigrated to Israel and actually worked on kibbutzim, and as you said, became Jews themselves, probably in atonement, but afterwards for true reasons, other than atonement, because they found that they loved the Jewish people. I was there's another thing you just pointed out. It doesn't say here that the people themselves necessarily might change, but it's their descendants. Is that correct?
That's what it's saying. The people themselves might change, but there's more than just the people themselves. They are containing whole worlds within inside them. And just to write off this entire world, all these descendants, because of one wicked person, it's a very short-sighted thing to do. We see that when Cain kills when Cain kills Abel, that the text says that the bloods of your brother are crying out to me from the ground. And the Hachamim understand the bloods meaning not only his blood, but the blood of every possible person that could have been born from Evil is crying out to God. And this is the idea that if you save one life, you save an entire world, because it's not just me, it's everyone who could possibly come from me. In fact, I don't know how scientifically true this is. I heard this, but I thought it was amazing that women, when they conceive a daughter, that inside their daughter's the fetus that is going to be their daughter is also the eggs that will one day be her children. So the grandmother is carrying her grandchild in the fetal stage, so to speak, because she's carrying the genetic material that's inside. It's very amazing to think that it's that connected between the bond between a mother and a daughter, or the mother and any child. But it's not just the one person here. It's the entire world and the entire realm of possibility that can come from it.
Okay, so I have the opposite kind of question.
Mhm.
What about in the case of Korach? They were all murdered, supposedly.
Yes.
Although I think
So,
we find later in the Torah, there was one or two descendants that escaped.
so actually,
that-
also in this week's parasha, I believe we also say "Bnei Korach lo metu," that the children of Korach did not die.
Ah,
And
so that's exemplifying this statement also.
yeah, there are two ways of understanding that statement. Some people understand it pessimistically, and saying like because the children of Korach did not die, that's why you have people who are complaining today still, like, oh, this is not good. They know how to do everything better. But the Hachamim, I believe, understood in a positive sense. So yeah, Korach was wicked and he was swallowed by the earth. But we see in the Psalm from Monday, we say, Mizmor Shir Libnei Korach. This is the song that was written by the children of Korach, and that they wanted to connect again into the realm of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's also people talk about the horrors of Christopher Columbus, for example, and what he did in the to the native populations, and that this was sort of like a culture of cruelty of Spain in general, and you can see it being carried out in many of the iterations of the conquistadors. But you also had people like Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a Spanish priest who came to the country, who came to the Southwest. And he was very, what do you call it, kind to the natives. He advocated for them. He didn't treat them like animals. He treated them like human beings. It's interesting to note that Bartolomé de las Casas is a descendant of conversos. Now, he himself was a devout Catholic, but he came from a Jewish background. And this is why Harambam would understand that Rahmunuthem, that they have this innate sort of quality of Rahamim that they learn from going all the way back to Abraham Avinu, and that carries on forward. And that's what we mean by Zechut Avot, or that we have the merit of our forefathers, of our ancestors with us. The good deeds kind of get ingrained into our family's culture, so to speak, and can be passed on. Then again, people also say that it's possible that Christopher Columbus himself was a converso. So you see, it's not always a guarantee. You can be a Jew and be the worst person in the world still, and you can be a non-Jew and be a very fantastic person. There's no guarantee to this formula here. Okay. Reaching individual providence, and oh yes, so the blah, 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 we read that. Grandchildren. Yes, so we're going on to the next page. I think we might be able to actually, let's finish this next paragraph and then
We lost you. Yosef, I can't hear you. Ann, can you hear him? No.
Okay. One second.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, so yes, I should share. Let me go back to sharing the screen. My apologies. This is what occurred with Terach and others. As we mentioned above, who did not merit divinity. Nevertheless, because of their elite ancestry, or because of the essence, or because of just the din of who their family was, just how we explained it, they sired people who had this family culture, and he says elite descendants. But this quality existed only in this pedigree and did not exist in the pedigrees of Ham and Yafeth. He's saying here that there was a there's a specialness to this family tree, this family line, this family teaching. I do want to examine, and maybe for next time, I do want to examine the original Judeo-Arabic, because this part here, this line of the Kuzari is often used to kind of justify racism. especially against descendants of Ham or black people. And there's a midrash that Rashi brings about the curse. And if you remember, when Ham sees his father Noah drunk and naked, Shem and Japheth cover up Noah, but Ham does not. He makes fun of his father, so to speak. And there are different midrashim that say he does terrible things to him, which we won't go over today, but we can go over another time. But the midrash says that the curse of Ham is that he will have bloodshot eyes and singed hair and burnt skin and et cetera, et cetera. And people go see that's, and they use that for blacks. And not every midrash, by the way, you should accept. There's no obligation to accept midrashim. It would be like if I went up in the kahal, in the synagogue, and gave a dirasha on Shabbat morning, where it's really just me pitching a pyramid scheme to you. You wouldn't be obligated to accept what I have to say. I can't. Oh, what's a midrash? So you have to accept. No, you can totally reject it, and you don't have to listen to me. So that's the same with the midrashim that we see. You can go, you know what? I don't buy it. I don't think it's important to take this midrash. I'm not saying to reject all midrashim, because midrashim are important. They have a ton of wisdom in them most of the time, and they need unpacking. And I'm sure that this midrash itself needs unpacking, and I'm sure that it's misunderstood, and I'm sure that the person who wrote it actually never seen an African before and was just trying to think of a person that, you know, was the opposite of him, and we're like, what would be scary to him, and didn't have that idea. And this is, I think, one time there was a young man in our shiur, fantastic Talmid Chacham, who asked the question about Shanei Haberiyot. There's a beracha that you make where you see a person who's not like you. You say, Baruch Atah, blessed are you, God, who creates the diversity of creatures. And the Gemara instructs a person to make that blessing when they see an African person. And so, again, take it in context, understand that they did not maybe know, they didn't have contact with Africans on a regular basis. And it probably should be pointed out that if an African Jew saw a white person, they would probably need to make the same beracha. Not probably, they would need to make the same beracha. And really, the beracha is about accepting everybody in creation and understanding that everyone is God's handiwork, rather than to try to, like, you're different, you're weird, and this and that. Anyways, that got off the rails. I do want to look at the original Judeo-Arabic and see what does he mean here by that this pedigree did not exist in Ham and Yafet, and what are we meaning here? And the English, for me, is really bothersome to read, because it really can be used to defend or support very racist opinions and ideas. And we should know, it should go without saying, Judaism rejects racism, and you must think critically when you're reading these midrashim and understand what they are trying to teach you, rather than take them at face value. With that, I will end unless there are any comments, questions, concerns, complaints. Tov me'od. Thank you so much, everybody. Let me stop the recording. Go ahead.
Avi is not having his class today.